Traffic froze on a fog-choked highway, not because of a crash, but because a full-grown tiger stood guard in the middle of the road, eyes locked on something hidden in the grass. Beside him, an old man whispered, "He's not here for us." What was he protecting? What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The tiger's breath steamed in the morning air, each exhale thickening the fog around its jaws. Its eyes, amber and ancient, swept the stalled line of cars as if searching, not threatening. This wasn't panic. This wasn't confusion. It was something worse, intention. Walter Gaines never looked away. His knuckles were white on the wheel, but his face was calm, too calm for a man with death 15 feet away. His truck, battered and sun-bleached from decades of use, made no sound. The engine idled, steady like a heartbeat. He didn't even reach for his phone. The other drivers, sequestered in metal cocoons, were a mix of curiosity and fear. Some cracked their windows to listen. A mother in a minivan clutched her daughter's hand and whispered prayers. A teenager live-streamed on social media, whispering updates like a war correspondent. In one car, a man vomited quietly into a coffee cup. Nobody dared open a door. The tiger roared again, the sound low and resonant, like the groan of something breaking inside the earth. Birds scattered from the tree line. A crow circled overhead, then vanished. The trees bordering the highway, pine and sweet gum mostly, stood stiff and silent, their branches dripping dew like sweat. A mile ahead, a police cruiser blocked the road, its blue lights casting a strobing glow through the mist. The officers stayed behind their doors, rifles raised but unused. Then the tiger moved again, slow, deliberate. Not toward the vehicles, not toward the flashing lights, but toward Walter. The old man didn't flinch. His eyes glistened, not from fear, but from memory. He opened his door, gasps echoed from the surrounding cars. Someone screamed for him to stop. Another honked desperately. Walter stepped down slowly, his boots crunching the gravel as he walked into the open. The tiger froze mid-step. The two stared at one another, man and beast, history and fury, while the world held its breath. Walter didn't speak at first. He just nodded once, a gesture loaded with something heavier than words. The tiger's tail swayed behind it, slow and hypnotic. Then, softly, Walter said, "I figured it'd be you." And the tiger impossibly stopped pacing. This wasn't an escape. This was a reckoning, and it had been a long time coming. The ditch was thick with weeds and the copper smell of mud, but Walter didn't hesitate. He moved like a man chasing the last thread of something precious, something long thought lost. The adult tiger, massive and battle-worn, watched his every motion but didn't growl again. He merely paced in place, his muscles taut with anguish, his breath shallow. The cub lay curled awkwardly, her orange and black stripes dulled beneath the grime. Her flank rose and fell in uneven intervals. A thin trail of blood trickled from her hind leg, staining the grass beneath her. Her eyes flickered open when Walter approached, but there was no fight in her, only fear and confusion. Walter knelt slowly beside her, his jeans soaking through with dew and dirt. He reached out, but not to touch, just to hover his hand above her, as if asking permission. The cub let out a faint whimper, and the adult gave a sharp chuff that halted Walter's movement. Their eyes locked, man and tiger, and in that silent communion, something passed between them. A memory, a warning, a plea. Walter spoke in a voice thick with gravel and grief. "She's too young for this, should have never been brought out here." A nearby officer raised his tranquilizer gun again, but another grabbed his arm and shook his head. "He's doing something," the second muttered. "Let him finish." The news helicopters above circled like carrion birds. Their blades chopped the air into static and paranoia. Reporters whispered theories: escaped zoo animal, illegal breeding, vigilante conservationist, but none of them had names. Only questions. Walter had names. He had scars, too. He ran a calloused hand over his face and looked toward the adult again. "You remember me, don't you?" His voice cracked like an old hinge. "Back then, She was barely bigger than this one. The tiger didn't move, didn't growl, but his body lowered, just slightly, less like submission, more like trust. Walter reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in old canvas, a fragment of rope, a faded leather collar, the kind used in backwoods carnivals and illegal wildlife compounds. He held it up like an artifact at trial. "She was taken from you. I tried to stop it," he whispered, "but they didn't listen." The cub whimpered again, and the big cat closed his eyes. Whatever this was, it didn't begin today. It had only returned. Raja hadn't roared in hours, but the air around him was heavy with a silence more deafening than sound. He stood like a monument beside the stretcher where the cub lay sedated, his eyes locked on her tiny frame as if willing her to breathe more steadily. Even tranquilized, she whimpered softly, instinctively reaching toward the warmth of his presence. Each movement of her paw drew a faint reaction from Raja, ears twitching, tail swaying, a language of deep bonds no human tongue could translate. Walter remained at her side, his hand resting just behind her ear, brushing matted fur with the gentleness of memory. A younger vet leaned in to ask something, but Walter didn't answer. His gaze stayed on Raja, his voice low and distant, as if speaking to the tiger was more natural than responding to people. He broke through a reinforced gate. Steel frame, double lock. That's not instinct. That's purpose. The words unsettled those listening. It wasn't just the escape, it was the precision, the will. Raja hadn't panicked, he hadn't lashed out, he had planned, tracked, crossed 30 miles of rural terrain with a limping cub, avoiding highways and towns until necessity forced him into the open. This was never just an animal acting on reflex, Walter continued. He knew she was missing, knew where to look, knew she couldn't make it far on her own. One of the officers leaned in, skeptical. "You saying he tracked her like a bloodhound?" Walter shook his head. "Number, I'm saying he tracked her like a father." The crowd watching behind the police tape had grown. Locals, reporters, some just curious, some visibly moved, others visibly uncomfortable. The line between human and beast was supposed to be clear, comforting. But now that line was blurred, uncomfortably so. There were men in suits whispering into earpieces, their eyes not on the cub, but on Raja and Walter, calculating consequences, liabilities, headlines. No one could explain the microchip data leak that revealed the cub's lineage. Someone had buried it, intentionally, and no one at the sanctuary had sounded an alarm until the police called. Questions piled up faster than answers, but for Walter, the facts weren't the most unthinkable part. What cut deepest wasn't Raja's escape, nor the cub's injuries, nor even the silence from the sanctuary. It was the realization that no one had come looking for them, no one, but him. They had expected chaos, maybe blood, headlines soaked in danger, but what unfolded on that fog-draped highway was something no one could script, something that softened even the hardest cynic's stare. It wasn't the standoff that broke them, it was the moment the truth cracked open, and they realized why the tiger had stopped the world. He wasn't threatening them, he was pleading with them. When the ambulance doors closed, the sound triggered something primal in Raja. He rose, tense, eyes tracking the vehicle like prey, but not out of rage, out of instinct, out of love. He padded after it with slow, décharmant strides, muscles taut, expression unreadable except for the grief in his eyes. It was the kind of look only a parent knows, that helpless ache when you're being pulled away from your child and can do nothing to stop it. One woman in a Subaru burst into tears. She didn't even know why at first, just that something inside her snapped. A man behind her, trucker cap in his lap, bowed his head and murmured a prayer. Phones stopped recording. Horns stopped honking. In their place came a hush, reverent and raw. The tiger didn't roar. He didn't charge. He simply walked after the vehicle, steadily, without breaking eye contact. And that, somehow, was worse than a frenzy, more haunting. Because it wasn't animalistic. It was human. That's when Walter stepped forward, past barricades and hesitation, past the uniformed men holding rifles trained low. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He just said it. "Let me ride with him. He's earned that." What made the drivers cry wasn't the spectacle. It was the surrender, the quiet dignity in Walter's voice, the silent nod of a tiger who allowed himself to be led, not caged, not captured, but understood. In a van meant for the untamable, a man sat with his hand pressed gently to the back of a creature once labeled dangerous, and not once did it flinch. 2 weeks later, when the sanctuary's update came, it felt less like news and more like a closing chord to a symphony they never knew they needed. Hope would live. Raja had been redeemed, and Walter, the overlooked, the dismissed, was the one who never gave up. The video played on a loop across the world, a tiger pausing traffic not out of rage, but devotion. A daughter rescued, a father's faith honored, and an old man who had listened to something deeper than logic, something sacred. That was what made them cry, not fear, not awe, recognition.